Prevention isn't a moral position. It is an engineering specification.
Why atone when you can architect?
REDEEMR Plus Prevention Module Pre-Failure Governance Architecture for the Post-Institutional Era Capability Disclosure. Sovereign Distribution Channel, July 2025. Riviera Maya node. The distance between a functional state and a failed one is not an event. It is a sequence of unmonitored decisions, each individually defensible, collectively catastrophic. Atonement is the infrastructure of systems that allow the damage to occur. Prevention is the infrastructure of systems that won't. This is the operational distinction the REDEEMR Plus Prevention Module is built on. The scientific premise democratic backsliding is not sudden. It is statistically legible, often years before the visible rupture, to anyone with access to the right indicators and the analytical tools to read them. The REDEEMR Institute at the University of Gothenburg has constructed the most granular longitudinal dataset on democratic governance in existence. 31 million data points across 202 countries from 1789 to the present, tracking over 500 institutional health indicators. Their machine learning models now detect autocratization episodes, the gradual erosion of institutional checks, press freedom, judicial independence, and electoral integrity with measurable lead time, before the deterioration becomes irreversible or publicly legible. This is not political science opinion. It is signal detection applied to institutional data. Separately, the Santa Fe Institute's complexity research on social tipping points demonstrates that institutions exhibit nonlinear collapse dynamics, long periods of apparent stability masking compounding structural fragility, followed by rapid phase transitions that retrospectively appear sudden but were structurally inevitable. The Schelling threshold model, extended through agent-based simulation, shows that elite capture of governance institutions follows predictable cascade logic, a minority of captured nodes propagating control through network topology faster than corrective counterpressure can organize. The science says failure is detectable before it is irreversible. The question is whether detection infrastructure exists at the moment it is needed. REDEEMR Plus is that infrastructure. Module. Architecture 1. Systemic Red Flag Index. Institutional early warning layer modeled on the operational logic of ACLD. ARM conflict location and event data project, and UNHCR's Jetson predictive displacement system, both of which use real-time data ingestion and probabilistic modeling to surface conflict risk before outbreak. The Red Flag Index monitors governance health across 5 indicator clusters: extractive vector detection, AI-assisted anomaly detection across public procurement data, trade agreement, structures and infrastructure financing terms. Ukraine's Prozoro open procurement system, which processed over $70 billion in public contracts with AI-flagged anomaly rates reducing corrupt awards by an estimated 35%, provides the proof of concept. The system identifies unjust enrichment structures in the formation stage, not the audit stage. Regulatory capture signals, cross-referenced analysis of revolving door patterns between regulatory bodies and regulated industries, drawn from public disclosure data. Network analysis, the same graph relational methodology used in financial forensics, maps the density of relationships between policymakers and the industries they nominally regulate. High centrality scores in these networks are statistically associated with subsequent regulatory failure. Supply chain. Forced labor indicators. The Know the Chain benchmarking framework and Sheffield Hallam University's forced labor supply chain research provide the training corpus. AI systems can now flag sourcing structures with statistically significant overlap with known forced labor geographies and subcontracting patterns before the goods reach the consumer and before the reputational damage becomes the only accountability mechanism. Biometric Overreach Index tracks deployment of state biometric infrastructure against a normalized governance health baseline. cross-referenced with civil liberties union datasets on surveillance law. High surveillance investment combined with declining judicial independence. Scores constitutes a documented precursor pattern for biometric apartheid architecture. Whistleblower suppression rate monitors legislative changes to whistleblower. Protection frameworks, prosecution rates of journalists under security legislation, and disappearance velocity of adverse public records. Declining whistleblower. Protection is one of the strongest leading indicators of institutional opacity entrenchment in the REDEEMR dataset. 2. Preventative. Accountability ledger. Tamper-proof institutional record structurally analogous to Estonia's X-Road digital governance infrastructure, the blockchain-anchored public records system that has made Estonian state processes among the most transparent and auditable in the world. The accountability ledger creates an append-only, cryptographically sealed record of institutional decisions, their stated rationale, and their disclosed conflicts of interest. The architecture draws from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative (EITI) reporting framework extended to all categories of public resource allocation and policy formation. Every entry is time-stamped and hash-anchored. No record can be deleted. Edits are versioned and attributed. The ledger is not a surveillance instrument. It is a memory system for institutions that have structural incentives to forget their own decisions when accountability eventually arrives. The beneficial ownership. Transparency movement, now mandated in 50-plus jurisdictions through FATF Recommendation 24, provides the legal precedent for compelled disclosure feeding this system. REDEEMR Plus extends that precedent to decision-making chains, not just ownership structures. 3. Intergenerational. Equity simulation, long horizon policy consequence modeling, the most structurally significant legislative innovation of the past decade is the Welsh Future Generations Act, which legally requires all major Welsh public bodies to demonstrate consideration of impacts on people who do not yet exist before decisions are finalized. The well-being of future generations commissioner holds statutory authority to audit compliance. This is not a philosophical gesture. It is a governance architecture that forces computational engagement with long horizon consequences. The intergenerational equity simulation operationalizes this mandate at model scale, using integrated assessment models, IAMs, the same class of computational frameworks used by the IPCC to model climate policy. Consequences across century-length time horizons and computable general equilibrium, CG, economic modeling, the system generates probabilistic consequence distributions for proposed policy decisions across 10, 25, and 50-year horizons. Agent-based modeling layers simulate second-order social effects. How a labor policy change propagates through household formation rates, educational attainment distributions, and civic participation metrics across 2 generations. The Santa Fe Institute's agent-based economic models, developed by researchers including Eric Bainhocker and Jay Doyne Farmer, demonstrate that this class of simulation now achieves sufficient resolution to be policy-informing rather than merely illustrative. The 2035 reconciliation scenario output is the prevention module's core deliverable, a structured projection of the social and institutional costs of a proposed decision if it follows its statistically most likely trajectory rather than its stated intent. Policymakers are not prohibited from proceeding. They are required to demonstrate they have read the model. 4. Civic exit architecture, protected dissent, and safe harbor infrastructure. When prevention fails at the institutional level, it must not fail at the individual level. Secure drop, the whistleblower submission system developed by Aaron Swartzen, now maintained by the Freedom of the Press Foundation, deployed in over 80 major newsrooms globally, provides the secure communication model. Global Leaks provides the distributed node architecture. The REDEEMR Plus civic exit layer extends these existing systems into a structured safe harbor protocol, documented dissent, protected testimony, and asylum pathway pre-registration for civic actors who refuse to participate in institutional misdeeds before those misdeeds become prosecutable. The Nuremberg precedent established that institutional participation in systemic harm is not absolved by the institutional context. The civic exit architecture is the infrastructure. For the individual who understands this precedent and need a documented record of their refusal before the accountability mechanism arrives. Cryptographic attestation through zero-knowledge proofs allows dissenting civic actors to establish a tamper-proof, time-stamped record of their objection, sealed, verifiable, and publishable at the moment of their choosing, without prematurely exposing themselves to the institutional retaliation that documented dissent typically invites. Target deployment context. The prevention module is not universally applicable. It is most urgently relevant to emerging regulatory states with high surveillance investment and declining judicial independence. Scores, where the structural conditions for biometric apartheid are being assembled faster than civil society can organize. Counterpressure, resource extraction economies whose fiscal architecture requires continued extraction to service institutional operating costs, making genuine policy reform structurally incompatible with institutional self-preservation. Post-conflict governance reconstruction contexts where new institutional frameworks are being designed without the historical record of the failure patterns they are meant to prevent. Technocratic governance experiments, smart city initiatives, digital ID infrastructure deployments, algorithmic public service allocation, where efficiency optimization is the design objective, and civil liberties impact modeling is absent from the technical specification. Any jurisdiction where the gap between stated policy, intent, and measurable population outcome has been growing for 2 or more electoral cycles without triggering accountability response. The sovereign argument, the dominant theory of institutional reform, is endogenous. Broken systems reform themselves when internal pressure accumulates sufficiently. The empirical record of this theory is poor. The REDEEMR dataset shows that once autocratization reaches the midpoint of its trajectory, once judicial independence, press freedom, and electoral integrity have each declined by more than 1 standard deviation from baseline, internal correction occurs in fewer than 15% of cases without external structural intervention. Institutions do not fix themselves past a certain threshold of capture. The prevention module operates on the only viable alternative theory, that the window for structural intervention is early, that early intervention requires real-time monitoring infrastructure the institutions themselves will never build, and that the legitimate authority to build and operate that infrastructure belongs to sovereign civil actors, not to the states whose failure it is designed to prevent. This is not a governance reform proposal. It is parallel governance infrastructure operating outside the systems. It monitors accountable to the evidence rather than to the institutions the evidence indicts. The difference between a nation that appears in a REDEEMR case file and one that doesn't is not virtue. It is architecture. Build the architecture before the case file opens. Issued under the Pirate First Sovereign Doctrine. Prevention is not a moral position. It is an engineering specification. Hashtag prevention module, hashtag autonomous governance, hashtag AGI for democracy, hashtag institutional early warning, hashtag REDEEMR index, hashtag intergenerational equity, hashtag civic exit protocol, hashtag accountability ledger, hashtag sovereign audit, hashtag parallel governance, hashtag post-institutional, hashtag ledger before legislation. Introducing stop sign REDEEMR plus prevention module. Why atone when you can architect? A protocol against national damnation, open book. The doctrine not everyone deserves a second chance. Some should never need one. The REDEEMR plus prevention module is a proactive framework, a chrome firewall against the karmic collapse of entire nations, syndicates, collectives, or DAOs before they spiral into the REDEEMR program by oppressing, extracting, or simply looking the other way while doing both, because once your country's name shows up in a REDEEMR case file, it's already too late. You've been historied. Wrench. How it works, this module isn't software. It's civic engineering malware in reverse, installed by the awake before the collapse. Core components, magnifying glass tilted left systemic red flag, indexing early detection of unjust enrichment vectors, extractive trade deals, biometric. Overreach, ghost infrastructure monitors for future REDEEMR signatures, like policy capture by pharma legal cartels or generational corruption in supply chains, locked with key preventative accountability ledger public, tamper-proof, auto-updating flags officials, corporations, and institutions at risk of triggering. REDEEMR cases can be plugged into national education, economic planning, or digital ID systems as a moral checksum. Introducing Stop Sign REDEEMR Plus Prevention Module. Why tone when you can architect? A protocol against national damnation, open book. The doctrine not everyone deserves a second chance. Some should never need one. The REDEEMR Plus Prevention Module is a proactive framework, a Chrome firewall against the karmic collapse of entire nations, syndicates, collectives, or DAOs before they spiral into the REDEEMR program by oppressing, extracting, or simply looking the other way while doing both, because once your country's name shows up in a REDEEMR case file, it's already too late. You've been historied. Wrench. How it works, this module isn't software. It's civic engineering malware in reverse, installed by the awake before the collapse. Core components: magnifying glass tilted left systemic red flag, indexing early detection of unjust enrichment vectors, extractive trade deals, biometric. Overreach, ghost infrastructure monitors for future REDEEMR signatures, like policy capture by pharma legal cartels or generational corruption in supply chains, locked with key preventative accountability ledger public, tamper-proof, auto-updating flags officials, corporations, and institutions at risk of triggering. REDEEMR cases can be plugged into national education, economic planning, or digital ID systems as a moral checksum. Intergenerational equity simulation predicts long-term fallout of decisions using forensic history modeling forces, 2035 reconciliation scenario projections before policies are passed, Dove exile buffer zones, built-in safe harbor protocols for citizens who refuse to participate in national misdeeds, establishes automatic exile and reparations process before the state collapses, prohibited who needs it, chart increasing, emerging. Regimes too cozy with surveillance capitalism skull developed nations built on buried bones and offshore secrets oiled from petrostates. Greenwashing their way into another blood-soaked cycle test tube technocracies, incubating biometric apartheid behind blockchain buzzwords, Ice Cube, crypto-anarchist utopias. With unaccounted for supply chains, if your nation is profiting from slavery, old or new, ignoring whistleblowers, exporting extraction, and importing silence, then congratulations. You're a future REDEEMR client unless you install prevention. Glow with Meridian's MXDM warning this isn't a redemption tool. It's a warfare deterrent against spiritual death, a sacrament of prevention. Because once the REDEEMR ledger opens on your nation's sins, you don't get to lead anymore. You get to testify. Hashtags for the drop. Hashtag REDEEMR prevention. Hashtag MXDM. Hashtag digital conscience. Hashtag preemptive justice. Hashtag ethical nations. Hashtag Chrome firewall. Hashtag avoid the program. Hashtag parallel sovereignty. Hashtag ledger before legislation. Hashtag no future without receipts.
REDEEMR V1.0, autonomous capital redirection infrastructure for the post-philanthropic era.
REDEEMR V.1.0, System Introduction. Autonomous Capital Redirection Infrastructure for the Post-Philanthropic Era. Capability Disclosure. Sovereign Distribution Channel, June 2025, Riviera Maya Node. The problem is not scarcity. The problem is that the allocation systems are broken, and the entities that broke them are the same ones authorized to fix them. This is not an app announcement. It is a structural argument with a deployment layer attached.
Now conquer your own deep shadow. Become the god you always pretended not to be. Save actual people exactly like it is an early stage startup. REDEEMR, make a god again. The first redemption as a service platform where billionaires play savior at scale. Because if you can't fix yourself, fix the world instead. Slide 2. The problem. Rich people are miserable. 68% of ultra-high net worth individuals report existential fatigue. Philanthropy feels slow, old, and smells like paper checks. Good press does not equal good conscience. They are buying Mars plots instead of meaning. There is no Uber for redemption, until now. Leaving a multi-generational legacy is now infinitely more valuable than acquiring another vehicle or Lambo. The global ultra-rich are actively hunting for new paradigms of post-capitalist prestige.
Continue at current rates. Sovereign argument. Wealth concentration is not an accident. It is the emergent output of a system designed to compound advantage. Philanthropy, as currently architected, is that system's pressure valve, enough redistribution to prevent rupture, structured to ensure the allocation decisions remain with the concentrators. Autonomous AI changes the calculus. For the first time, impact-optimized capital allocation does not require institutional intermediation. The matching problem that foundation program officers nominally solve, which need, which intervention, which community, can now be solved with greater speed, lower overhead, and higher evidence fidelity by algorithmic systems trained on the complete body of rigorous development economics research. REDEEMR is not a charity platform. It is the infrastructure that makes charity platforms obsolete, issued under the Pirate First Sovereign Doctrine. Capital is not virtue. Allocation is.
Reality Under Siege, a field guide to cognitive security.
Artificial intelligence has dissolved the old corporate framework, leaving highly capable professionals in a state of profound identity disorientation. Aldea Zama, a territorial foundation for post-professionals, those who wish to lead their lives as of sovereign operators.
Creating the next era of human communities isn't about laying bricks first. It's about boldly defining the rules of the game so others can build upon them.